Decay, Decadence, sort of famous, starts off as a play by Oscar Wilde, turns into an opera by Richard Strauss. This is concerned with decay and decadence particularly. It's often the case that these religious ideas about purity versus pollution often sort of contrast females with males. It's often considered in many, many religions and many, many ideologies that women in particular are a source of contamination and impurity. And that, of course, they're very important. We need the biological side of life. We need women to keep life going and to biologically produce the next generation. But at the same time, women are further removed than men from the sacred, from a higher order. And you have a tremendous concern at this time, before the First World War, say around 1900, you have a tremendous concern in particular that women are, in particular, are a source of decadence and decay, and they lost the early purity of morals that they used to have. And a play and an opera which was wildly sort of condemned at the time as decadent and shocking, but also attracting a huge amount of attention, for example, is this play Salome. Salome being the individual the daughter of Herod, who sort of asks that John the Baptist, demands that John the Baptist's head be cut off. And so you actually have this play, this opera, where you see this pretty horrifying female in love with John the Baptist and kissing his severed head. This was, back in the day, people weren't quite as used to this kind of thing in the movie theaters and so on. So this was fairly shocking stuff. But again, a concern that we live in decadent times, that women in particular are dangerous and a source of decay. And then an event of enormous importance that's really going to help a lot of these ideas to sort of come together is going to be the First World War. The First World War happens, and it's this extraordinarily bloody, destructive event after nearly 100 years of peace in Europe. You have war breaking out and slaughter going on a massive scale, huge loss of life, major social disruption. And when the war is over, you have people during the war itself, and when the war is over, you have people trying to understand what's going on here and what just happened. And, well, people come up with different answers. I mean, there's some people who are going to say, well, this was an incredibly violent and destructive event, but it had to be done in order to stop the Germans from conquering Europe or defend the German nation or whatever. So there's some people who say, well, it's a bloody, awful thing, but it needed to be done. There are going to be other people who say, this was a terrible mistake and we should never have done such a thing. There are going to be people who say, well, it's all the capitalists, the arms dealers who got us into this thing. We need to fight this war at all. But there are going to be, during the war itself and after, there are going to be a lot of voices from a lot of different countries saying, wait a minute, you're talking about the deaths of millions of people, you're talking about it like it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. This is actually a glorious moment. And in the first years of the First World War, you hear a lot of voices expressing this kind of sentiment. So here is just anticipating that in the middle of this decadent, decaying society in which it's everybody looking out for themselves and women being even worse than men, there's this idea that war can be this force of unity and purification. Here's a German historian writing before the First World War, sort of anticipating a war. The grandeur of war, according to Heinrich von Treitschke, the grandeur of war lies in the utter annihilation of puny man and the great conception of the state that brings out the full magnificence of the sacrifice of fellow countrymen for one another. the love, the friendliness, and the strength of that mutual sentiment. Here is an Italian, Marinetti, part of the futurist movement in Italy, writing that war is the sole hygiene of the world. So war is actually shedding bloodshed as an act of purification. And here is an Irish nationalist, Patrick Pearse, writing about warfare, writing that bloodshed is a cleansing and sanctifying thing. The nation which regards it as the final horror has lost its manhood. And then in the first going off to observe, Patrick Pearse observing the sort of daily killing carnage in France, is writing, the last 16 months have been the most glorious in the history of Europe. Heroism has come back to the earth. It is good for the world that such things be done. The old heart of the earth needed to be warmed with the red wine of the battlefield. Such august homage was never before offered to God as this, the homage of millions of lives given gladly for love of country. Here's a French nationalist, Maurice Barre. He was writing that nothing is more beautiful yet more difficult to understand than these boys today, cold in their graves, who gave themselves for France. But these are marvelous times in which one may again find himself, times in which the splendor of our profound unity is revealed. So the differences and the divisions which yesterday seemed insurmountable have today completely disappeared. And you hear again and again people talking about the war as a groom sweeping his clean, as a bracing the wind, as a set of pruning shears, sort of cleaning out waste, as a cleansing storm, a purifying fire. And the iconography of sacrifice is very much part of the war. Imagery found in many, many cases. This is just an Italian representation. But this is a dying soldier actually sort of lifted up Christ-like to heaven. So you have a strong idea leading up to the war and in the war itself that this is not only about here are certain national objectives we have, and well, in order to attain those objectives, we have to sacrifice a certain number of men. Rather, there is something glorious about the sheer carnage of warfare. It's taking us out of our decadent, decaying, selfish, individualistic selves and bringing us, purifying us, bringing us sort of into a more exalted, more unified kind of state. So war was very often seen not purely in rational instrumental terms, but war was seen during this period by a great many people as, no Aztec would have had any trouble understanding this, as a sacrifice. And sacrifice is a necessary part of the cosmic order, and it is a way of getting away from this kind of decadent, decaying world. Not coincidentally, very much a world of men at the front, leaving women behind. The Second World War, you get a sort of coldly instrumental view of war being expressed by General Patton, famous speech where he declares that, "I want you to remember that no poor dumb bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country." Now, this is a very down-to-earth, practical view. You don't want to be killed yourself. You want to make the other guys die. But in fact, psychologically, that's not entirely true. Psychologically, acts of martyrdom, of sacrifice, can be inspiring and unifying, and were inspiring and unifying to a lot of people. Just knowing that people gave their lives for this great cause, a lot of people found that moving and uplifting and inspiring. So you have the period after the war, when the war was over, and in particular, this whole logic of sacrifice, and we have offered this sacrifice, is going to appeal particularly. Guys, really, this theme is very widespread, but it's going to be particularly in European countries, various European countries. You have fascist extreme right movements, taking up this theme that we, as a nation, have made this sacrifice